Welcome to CapitolView, the weekly program on state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining us this week on CapitolView is Dave McKinney, reporter for WBEZ Radio in Chicago. Welcome, Dave.
Bruce, good to see you.
Good, it's good to see you. And also Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at University of Illinois at Springfield. Welcome, Professor.
Good to be here too.
Well, let's start with perhaps something that might affect a lot of things, which is cancellation of the state veto session, which had been scheduled for just a few weeks from now here in Springfield. The legislators, with coronavirus numbers surging statewide and across the nation, have decided that perhaps gathering to do some legislation and convene might not be the safest or wisest course of action. First off, can we take folks at their word? Was there another way to do this? Are they getting out of, I guess folks can say last time they met at Bank of Springfield Center, the numbers are worse this time. So let's say that, assume that this is necessary. What impact does this have given the issues that are facing us today? What do you think, Kent?
Well, I don't think they had any choice in terms of the way the numbers are going with the pandemic. If they're telling people to think twice about getting together with your family on Thanksgiving, then it's a really bad look to try and get that many people together in Springfield. And it's an acknowledgement of where we are with fighting the coronavirus, and this bleeds into a whole bunch of other things. But as we've learned, when the General Assembly has an agreement, they can do things very quickly. And when they don't have an agreement, they can kill a week without anything happening. So, but it does have, it does push a stuff off that they might have gotten off the table. But I don't think this is in any way surprising. There's if they're trying to be consistent with the messaging, and the city of Springfield did a 180 after saying they were going to try some kind of modification of the governor's plan, and so doing this in general is not a good idea. Doing it in Springfield is probably even a worse idea.
We got two things, many things, but two to me at least rise worth mentioning. One is in the area of fiscal matters. We've got a $4 billion hole now in the state budget, which everybody is acknowledging. And with the graduated income tax failing, the governor or state government, call it what you will, has written some checks they're not going to be able to cash right now. And so we've got a $4 billion hole in the state budget, but we've also got things that aren't related to money. And those are social reform sorts of things. We have the Black Caucus debating and bringing forth proposals and ideas such as the elimination of cash bail to help make things more equitable for people that don't require necessarily any expenditure of state funds. Let's start with the social agenda. What do you do if this is pushed off until the regular session, and who knows far beyond that? How do you address the matters that are on the Black Caucus's agenda and the national agenda without the legislature meeting? I mean, how do you make sure that we continue the inertia that we'd seen earlier this year, starting last spring?
Well, I mean, I think that the Black Caucus holds a great deal of leverage right now in many, many ways. I mean, African Americans came out in force, to support Joe Biden, and I think that the momentum that was behind this whole lineup of things you mentioned, getting rid of cash bail being one of them, and equity in wages in the workplace, and there is a whole litany of things that they have on their to-do list. Now, the reason I say they have leverage is because, and I'm sure we'll get to this later on, but House Speaker Michael Madigan is busy trying to gather up votes for Speaker. And this year is proving to be a little more troublesome on that front than we're accustomed to seeing with him. And I think that he is having to rely pretty heavily on support from the Black Caucus. And it would not surprise me at all to see promises made, to fast track some of these things, to pick up votes for him for his bid for speaker. And so, whether they do it now or whether they do it in February or March, it's still, I still expect that there will be action taken on a good many of these things that they're wanting to do.
And I think yours is a point well taken. Michael Madigan might be many things, but one thing that he is known for is when he makes a deal and he gives his word, he keeps it. And so what's the spread right now in terms of votes to maintain his speakership? We're in the 10s, 12s, something like that. We've had a number of members say no publicly. I won't do it. How far away is he? I mean, I think that if you're betting right now, you'd bet on him to retain, but it's not a lock. How many votes do you think we're talking about?
Yeah, you need 13.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've got to get 60. I mean, and it's good enough to keep him from getting 60, but we have had, it took 93 ballots for Bill Redmond to become speaker back in 72 or 74, I think it was. And I think it took over 170 ballots for Dan Hines to become president of the Senate. You can stop somebody like Dan Walker stopped Clyde Schote from being Speaker of the House, but then eventually you've got to put 60 votes on the board, and if you've only got 5 or 6 hard no's, then you've got to round up another 7 people, and that gives the Speaker a lot of leeway. Although we have to differentiate, things about the Black Caucus's agenda that essentially don't require an appropriation. It's going to be a lot easier to do that than it is to promise money in the middle of an incredible budget crisis. And so they're not going to get everything that they want right away, because then it becomes cutting money to schools, not funding caseworkers at Children and Family Services. I mean, the trade-offs are brutal.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Bruce, I think on your number question though too,
sure.
that, right now I think the head count is from what I was hearing yesterday, 8 firm no's for him among the House Democratic Caucus. Okay. And as Kent says, right now they need to have 13 no's to create a lot of uncertainty here to get that number down to 59. Because it takes 60 votes to pass and approve a new speaker. Mm-hmm. I think that, I think there's a great deal of uncertainty about, what people's intentions are here. There, a lot of these new members coming in, they have a surprising amount of leverage. We talked about leverage with the Black Caucus, but these new members coming in, many of whom campaigned against Madigan, right, create this whole it's a strange environment, but certainly all of this traces back to Madigan's being immersed in the Commonwealth Edison bribery scandal. Sure. And though he's not been charged, he's been identified repeatedly in federal documents as public official A, and ComEd has acknowledged that they were engaging in bribery, hiring friends and cronies of the Speaker to influence him and to help their agenda. So, while he's not been charged, he still hasn't been able to get disentangled from that. And so that's why this has created this moment of weakness for him.
Oh, sure. I mean, the ComEd is the catalyst for what we're talking about now. And where there's crisis, this is likely a cliche from someplace, there is opportunity. And so what do you do if you're Pritzker, for example? Does the governor has taken a yes or no sort of thing on this. It's up for the caucus to decide. It's a legislative matter. I'm not really going to get involved with it. As a party leader, what do you think? Not so good. He's a good person for a job. How can you maintain that?
Yeah, I think the governor doesn't have a lot of leverage in this. And one of Madigan's support, one of the things that keeps Madigan in power is that the people that fund Democratic politics, and we're talking about the trade unions, to a lesser extent, service employees, public employee unions, the trial lawyers. There are people that, that's where the money comes from. And, we saw a statement from the largest operating engineers local, which is in total, the operating engineers are the biggest funder of Democratic politics, come up with a statement of support. So, it is a very, there's a lot of moving things going on. One of the things that, is possible is, will old and new members be willing to bargain with the speaker, and will the speaker be willing to bargain? Can you talk about decentralizing, moving power back to members, back to committees, moving resources to members? And so, Madigan has not had to think in those terms up to now, and that's a possibility.
Yeah, well, I'll play devil's advocate if I could for a second. I'll play devil's advocate with you. The unions, okay, if it comes down, and it's a fluid situation, and if we're really in real speak, fewer than 10 votes are right, and we're a ways away from having the vote, couldn't Pritzker and other folks say, first of all, to some members that might be on the fence, what do you want? I remember Abraham Lincoln. I was watching the movie just the other night when he needed the votes during the lame duck session to abolish slavery. What post office do you want to run, man? And so could that sort of thing come into play in terms of the governorship? And you can tell the unions, you know what? If you want to give the money to the Republican Party that brought you Bruce Rauner and those sorts of policy agendas, go ahead. Is there something to be said for that?
I mean, Bruce, the thing that is so interesting about the governor, sure, the governor has, great leeway in promising road projects and sorts of things like that could appeal to people. Clearly he does. I think what was interesting, he was right out of the gate. There was barely a day that passed, if even a day, since the election, when he came out pretty surprisingly, forcefully, I thought, and said, hey, we should have a new party chairman. And, here we have a governor who in 2 years is up for reelection. Yeah. He has not said he's not running for reelection. And I think there are indicators that suggest he probably will seek reelection. And if that scenario plays out, what the Republicans are going to throw at him. It's going to be Madigan 24/7, because look, in the results we saw on November 3rd, Madigan became such a potent issue for Republicans in a lot of races that it was able to kind of blunt any sort of coattail effects that Joe Biden might have ordinarily have had down ballot on voting. And so, Pritzker is playing it, I think, fairly smart in putting distance. Now, the opposite side of this is that if he wants to get anything passed in the General Assembly in the next 2 years, assuming Madigan holds on to the gavel and continues to retain influence, the governor's got to work with him. So he's really kind of walking this tightrope where he's having to deal with the political realities that Madigan now is such a toe on voters' minds, that he has to address that, but he also has to be realistic and know that, hey, he's got 2 more budgets to pass in difficult times and needs the speaker's help.
No, I think you're right. I think he's playing the time game very well. I mean, you don't, and not surprisingly, but if Pritzker has a war room, absolutely, it's got to be on your mind. And at what point in time do you have to jump ship? And does that become necessary? In terms of the $4 billion hole we've got in the state budget, what do you do about it? Do you hope that the feds are going to come through with a loan that hasn't come through yet? What sorts of cuts might we be expecting? If this is absolutely does come true, we got to get rid of $4 billion. Who's got to be afraid?
Yeah. This is not an either or kind of choice. I think that's painfully clear. The budget that the governor passed and the General Assembly passed, was a bridge budget. The assumption that they made was gambling and marijuana revenue will get us to the graduated income tax, that will get us a big boost in revenue, that will allow us to start working on paying down the debt, working on the pensions. That is gone. We didn't get any of those. Well, we got marijuana. Eventually, we'll get gambling. It will make a difference. But, you're going to have to cut things painfully. You're going to have to borrow money. I believe you have no choice except to get some revenue unless you're willing to accept cutting funding for schools, funding for local government and the local government distributing fund. I mean, what we learned from the Rauner years was that there's really not the amount of budget of the state budget that's discretionary is not very big in relative terms. And so I see nothing but pain. I see the Republicans, Durkin came out today with a statement or yesterday saying, well, if you're going to pass the tax increase, there won't be any Republican votes. I don't think we're going to negotiate something with the Republicans. I think they're willing to sit back and let the Democrats make all of the hard choices. I wouldn't want to be a freshman having to deal with this. So I don't see any good outcomes. I see just lots of pain.
Yeah, and one thing, this might be perhaps is more speculative than it should be, but take the marijuana revenue that you've talked about. In the scheme of things, it's always been described as a drop in the bucket. Social equity is more important. It's amounting now, they're about to award, I think, $32 million in grants on the very first, opening days of marijuana revenue to social programs in areas deemed disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs and to help folks that have suffered due to violence and crime and that sort of thing. Well, if that's going to crescendo to perhaps more than $100 million, and at the same time, you've got the state prison system, which is, I did a story on it recently, it needs millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to bring healthcare up to constitutional standards. And something like 60–80% of the folks in state prison systems aren't white. And so those are the sorts of questions, at least in my own mind, that I think that the state is facing now.
I mean, the problem when the legislature passed the budget last summer and Pritzker signed it, they were banking on $5 billion coming from Congress in pandemic relief money. Mm-hmm. And of course, there was the first round of relief that came, but the one that they were banking on coming never did. And so now, with Republicans poised in D.C. to control the U.S. Senate, it's a real unknown whether there's going to be another stimulus program. I mean, I think it will be a priority for the Biden administration to try to get some help for state and local governments, because believe me, Pritzker has been on the phone with Biden's people explaining this dilemma and saying we need help. I mean, another thing, the problem with budget making right now, especially, is that it's really difficult to be able to look out 6 months from now and know whether we're standing on granite or whether we're standing in swampland, because it's just there are just so many uncertainties. And we see really promising and encouraging news on a vaccine from Pfizer, and suppose that gets rolling and proves to be 90% effective as they say it is. That could, if it's showing results, I mean, we very well could see an uptick then in the economy that would sort of make a lot of these issues go away. Because don't forget, before the pandemic, the budget that had been laid out there was actually running a slight surplus, which in Illinois, you just never see it. You never see it. And it was because, the economy was still going great guns. The sales tax and the income tax were still performing well. Yeah. And I think that there's potential for some of that coming back. And if we see this big boom in the economy that, a lot of forecasters say will happen once we nip the pandemic, it will have an entirely different picture.
Yeah, I wish I could, I'm more pessimistic because of the way this plays out in terms of the time frame. I mean, effective pandemic relief in terms of virus and therapeutics is really good news for the 2023 or the 2024 budget when things, when we get there. There's just a lot of this. I mean, people say pension reform. Well, you 2 years to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot, another year or two to litigate the federal issues in terms of that, and all of a sudden you're in 2024 or 2025. So, there may be sunshine off in the distance, but this is going to be, horrendous to try and put this together for the next 18 months.
Sunshine off in the distance. That sounds a lot different than a new day in America. Well, perhaps we're showing our age here. With regard to the Dave, I think you brought up the sales tax. One of the criticisms of Pritzker's fiscal plan has been its reliance on a graduated income tax, without giving any or much regard to other reforms that folks have long called for. I'm talking here about retirement taxes, taxes on retirement income, taxes on services, extending the tax to services. Is there any, now that this has gone down, if you're looking at the shambles of it, how do you make a phoenix rise from this and get us a better tax system than what we've got now?
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to see anything dramatic for the duration of Pritzker's term here on, revolutionary tax reform. I mean, I would be shocked if they're, even on the revenue side, if we see them, go to the lengths of raising the income tax above what it is now. I think it's a very difficult thing. We've seen past budgets where, there's sort of the treading water budgets where, they'll cobble together fund transfers or close what they call corporate tax loopholes, and, a few $100 million here, a few $100 million there. Suddenly they paper over what the hole is. And honestly, this number, 3.9 billion, is a substantial number that will require painful cuts. There's no question, but they probably can do it without having to do a tax increase. I'm guessing an overall tax increase, because politically, again, the governor is, assuming he is running for re-election, it's a vote he can't have on his record. He just cannot have it. And he made clear right out of the gate in the last, after it was clear that the tax amendment had failed, he made it crystal clear that he's not going to be for any kind of tax on retirement income, on Social Security checks or pensions. And so that's another sign to me that he may be leaning toward re-election. But those things he's taken off the table, at least with retirement income. We'll see in the next week or two how meetings with the leaders go, and is there appetite on the Democratic side, especially for any kind of tax increase? I suspect not.
Well, once you drink from the fountain of political office, it's hard to stop. And here Pritzker is, I think you're right. I mean, yeah, of course, it's a long ways from re-election. A lot can happen in 2 years. But you got to guess that unless someone comes offering him, say, the U.S. presidency or something like that, some higher senatorial sort of thing, which is hasn't happened, and who knows what will happen tomorrow. Yeah, he's got to preserve his options, and he doesn't need this on his record. Doesn't want it.
Yeah. One of the things, we're at $8 billion of unpaid bills. We were up, I don't even remember the number anymore, 16, 18, whatever it was, $1 billion of unpaid bills. If I were going to sign a contract with the state, I'd want my money up front. It's going to be ugly. And, the implications of that is we paid over $1 billion in one fiscal year for interest and penalties. It's like taking all of that money and dumping it in the middle of the rotunda, the state capitol, and setting it on fire. Mm-hmm. But, we're going to be desperate in terms of putting this together.
Lastly, we're going to run out of time soon, so I want to make sure we got about a minute. Let's talk about COVID quickly if we can. Numbers are surging. There's been somewhat of a rebellion in parts of the state. That's been fallen back somewhat here in Springfield from where we're broadcasting, where local officials had said we're not going to follow the governor's orders on bars and restaurants, and then saw the numbers and said, I guess we will. How much of an issue might this be for the governor to actually be able to get folks to follow his directives? on a larger level as he needs to right now.
Look, all you have to look at are the rate of hospitalizations in every community across the state. If we are seeing hospitals, filled to the brim and patients in hallways as a result of this, that will turn around a lot of people's attitudes, because if you get in a car accident, you're going to go to the hospital and they can't treat you.
Sure.
It's a problem, and we are on the verge of that. I mean, I think in a couple of weeks they're saying we are facing a real dilemma with our hospitals.
Oh, sure. Yeah. By then, it's almost, I'm not going to say it's too late, but, Ecuador, for example, a country that's near and dear to me, that happened. And that's happened in a lot of other countries. And you don't want to see it happen here in Illinois. And so hopefully folks will pay attention, mask up, and do what we're doing on Capitol View. Zoom when you can. And with that, we'll see you next week. And thanks for joining us.